Hey everybody, this is Bob Crossan, Senior Managing Editor for Water and Waste Digest, and today I have with me Gary Wong. He is Principal of Global Water Industry for OSIsoft, and we're going to talk a little bit about some smart water and data today, huh?
Definitely. Thanks for
Yeah,
having me here, Bob.
yeah, it's great to have you. So, um, one of the things that OSIsoft is really known for is operational data and real-time operational data. Can you talk a little bit about what you mean when you're talking about that and how that can be used?
Sure. So operational data and real-time data here really means think of all those control systems, automation systems, SCADA systems that you see at all our water wastewater facilities. They generate a lot of data in real time, and there's a lot of history behind it. But what we're also seeing now is there's a lot of data that's being generated from the industrial Internet of Things, IIoT. So a lot of sensors that and other instruments that are really generating all this data, and they might not be part of your typical controls and automation system. So they're a lot for monitoring as well. So you can imagine now that there's a lot of these different data silos being generated from these different sensors, meters, smart devices, along with all the automation data. So it's can be a bit of a mess. So you really kind of need to know what you're doing in terms of how to manage all that data, and having a real-time infrastructure is absolutely important.
Yeah, so historically, smart water and data, a lot of utilities have had just like paper trail, essentially, right? So a lot of stuff is just kind of in a closet somewhere. How have utilities been making the jump from the paper trail to the digital trail, and what is kind of the process there?
Right. You can't always automate everything, of course. So there's still a lot of manual data input. We also see a lot of grab samples, for example, that people go in the field. They might get some water quality, right? And that needs a bit more processing as well. So there's going to be a lot of different aspects to this. So it is really a journey. And you're right. You see some utilities still have chart recorders, right? And so that's really manual as well. But a majority of the utilities today, they definitely have some type of automation SCADA type system, right? But where you're starting to see really is the prevalence of a lot of IIoT type sensors and devices. So you're starting to see things like real-time water quality monitoring. You can monitor, for example, sewers and manholes now. So you're kind of lighting up all these areas that used to be completely dark and unknown to you in terms of what was happening out in the field. So those are generating a lot of data, and of course, you still have that manual data, like you say. So it is a
Mhm.
journey from going completely, the old process of having manual data, paper trails a day, to something that's fully automated. And we're starting to see more and more of that.
Yeah. So how can this data be used to predict future incidents and whatnot? That seems to be a lot of where this is headed, is how can we be more proactive,
Right.
especially with maintenance?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you can use this data, one, for, looking at leaks, maintenance, like you say, reducing energy costs and so forth. But the whole trick really is to start getting into that predictive analytics, right? How can we use this data to prevent an upset or a disaster from happening, right? So that's something that's really critical, and a lot of historical data. So having that history and that historical data is really important because it's all about recognizing patterns, right? So you might have some type of predictive model. You hear a lot about machine learning, right? Artificial intelligence, where you feed a lot of this data in the right context, and that's what our customers do, for example, through the Pi system, into a lot of these different models, which are hungry for data, right, and lots of data. So we provide it in a way that it's cleansed, it's shaped, it has context, so these predictive models and analytics can occur. And a lot of times those models then will come back into our system as future data. So then now you can compare actuals versus forecasted.
Hmm.
And that's really important. I can think of multiple examples. One is like Taswater down in Australia,
Hmm.
uh, on the island of Tasmania, and they have our system there. And the story that they started off with that they told last year was in August of 2017, there was 6,000 liters of wastewater that basically backed up, overflowed, and spilled into this area called Pittwater, which is a pristine and beautiful nature preserve. The other thing is not only is it beautiful there, but there's a huge oyster industry. $24 million a year in oysters that they grow and
Oh, wow.
farm. So unfortunately, with this spill, it basically, wreaked havoc for about 3 weeks. So they said, no, we got to do something better. So when they put our system in, they basically worked with one of our partners as well, Seek, and they have an application together that basically just works seamlessly to be able to predict when the next backup is going to occur. So it's really looking at patterns, looking at the pattern in terms of how much, how long it takes to fill up all these sewage pumping stations that they have. So it's the time to fill and also the time between, the next pump cycle. And with that, if they had the system, they've shown that they would have actually forecasted that event from happening 13 hours earlier.
Hmm. Yeah. So that leads pretty well into transparency. That's one of the things that I've noticed that you guys talk a little bit about too, is kind of the transparency of data from a utility perspective. Can you talk about the importance of that transparency and how that's evolving and changing right now?
Yeah. Being transparent is absolutely critical in today's world. Everything moves at real time, right? There's a lot of social media happening, right? Of course. And for a utility to be transparent, it really is not only internally, for example, being able to, during our pandemic right now, is, keeping workers safe,
Hmm.
and also to the public, right? To ensure them that, our drinking water is safe and so forth. You can imagine without this technology, you wouldn't be able to, remotely monitor, which means then you might have to send people on site and camp them there at some of these, plants. And, that's something that's just not sustainable. And of course, puts people's lives at risk and so forth. So being transparent, you really need, this real-time operational technology that we're talking about to remotely monitor. Being transparent also allows you to, have a lot of goodwill. Is letting people know what's going to happen. For example, right? You might have a source change of water that might create, a bit of discoloration or taste changes as you blend it. But if you're able to allow your customers to know that's going to happen, you're definitely going to reduce the number of calls, for example, to the call center, and then people, are in the know. So it's being, proactive, and that's really important.
Yeah. So what circumstances make changes to how transparent you are or the types of transparency that you're doing? I imagine now, especially with coronavirus, there's different transparency principles that you would follow than outside of a pandemic like this.
Yeah. So, but utilities talk about being resilient, and that's absolutely critical. And that's what we do on a daily basis. Is we want to be much more resilient. But the thing is, we don't know when the next pandemic or the next crisis is going to hit, right? It could be wildfires or a drought, right? So it's really important to maintain trust, right? Not only internally but also with customers. I can think of two great examples. One is the Bespi down in Brazil. They're the largest water wastewater utility in the southern hemisphere. In 2015, there was a massive drought, which meant that they actually had to turn off water supply to certain regions at different times. It all started where they didn't get the information out there in time, in a timely manner, and then people were in the dark, really, unfortunately. So they said, we really need to change that around. So after they put in our system, they're able to monitor exactly what's happening in real time at a lot of their facilities, at the source water, and figuring out basically where to provide water and when at the lowest possible cost, right? And they knew that they couldn't provide water everywhere all the time because of the drought, because they're really, really low on water. But they were able to notify their customers of when they were going to get water, for example, right? So that really allowed them to actually increase their customer satisfaction by 20%. And then became like the second most trusted government organization in Brazil. At the
Wow.
same time, they were able to reduce their energy costs by 9% and also reduce the number of incidents to the call center because now they're providing people with the water much more efficiently,
Yeah.
right? So that's another, maybe closer to home is the city of Salem in Oregon. They, well, Bob, you probably know with climate change, the water is starting to get warmer and lakes are starting to warm up. And we're starting to see this across the world where there's algae blooms starting to form in these lakes as the temperature rises in the water. So in 2018, they had this situation in Salem, and they basically notified everyone and said, hey, be careful. Some of these algal blooms basically can create cyanotoxins, unfortunately. So they become quite harmful to us and
Mhm.
our pets and so forth. So they kind of warned the public, and next thing people are clearing the shelves at the supermarket, buying up all the bottled water. So they said, we got to do something better. So, what they did is they put in the PI system, and they worked with the prediction lab at the University of Oregon and had a model to be able to predict if they're going to have algae blooms or not, and also the probability of having cyanotoxins. So that's something that they established, um, not during any kind of crises per se, but they did experience something, and they're saying, hey, we need to be prepared for the next unknown. And just one example, and it's interesting because actually they're going to do a live Q&A session with us Thursday of this week, and they're kind
Oh.
of going to talk about the situation, and they're looking at other opportunities already.
Mhm.
So there's a lot happening for them, which is great.
Yeah. So when it comes to both, I guess both from the transparency side as well as this use of real-time data side, what are some guiding principles that utilities can keep in mind when they're looking at incorporating this data and utilizing this data to further their utility?
Yeah. So first of all, I think having more sensors out there is really important. The prevalence of cheap IoT, IoT type sensors is incredible. And I think the utilities have a great opportunity to be able to leverage this type of technology so they can start to see what's happening out there for monitoring purposes, right? Um, and that's one thing to start off with. However, that creates obviously more data silos. And sometimes, unfortunately, we hear people say, oh, we have too much data. But as if you have something like the PI system in place where you have that, real-time operational intelligence available to you, you can make sense of all that data. You can bring all that into having that one source of the truth, right? Along with your SCADA systems, this IIoT type data from all these sensors. And now this data is sitting in different areas as well, on premise, at the edge, right, where those sensors reside, and also up into the cloud, as we're starting to see more and more of these sensors, the data is going directly into the cloud. So having that, operational intelligence in real time, that one source of the truth really is really important. So, having the software in place where you're able to start to provide context and make sense of that data so you can, visualize it and analyze it to generate the results that you're looking for.
Yeah, yeah. One of the things I hear about getting more sensors too is, well, make sure that you have a good maintenance plan in place so you understand like when you need to clean and all that kind of stuff, because what good is the data if the sensor's not calibrated or cleaned.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what's great is, not only do you get information about the quality of water, for example, as well, but you can also bring back and see, like you say, that maintenance aspect to it, right? And I know you asked a question earlier about condition-based maintenance or monitoring. Absolutely, that's something where a lot of these sensors can play. For example, looking at energy consumption. You can start easily doing calculations on specific energy, or looking at the assets where are we deviating from the expected pump curve, for example,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that allows you to generate that trigger to your maintenance management system to say, hey, we got to do a work order on this asset, instead of just being schedule based, right?
Yeah, yeah. You can be more proactive. You can say, we can
Yeah.
focus our efforts here because we know that this is the area specifically that needs some attention right now, as opposed to doing maintenance on somewhere that maybe it could have waited a month or something.
Yeah, exactly. We see a lot of that. So there's just a lot of different opportunities, and it's what we do at OSIsoft really is to be able to provide easy access to all this data, to make it into a package, so people can easily understand it, and to provide it to not only people but other systems that might need that data in a way that's really easy to consume without programming and so forth.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I do appreciate you taking the time today. You mentioned the Q&A earlier. Is there a good way that people can view that after the fact?
Yeah, actually, it's on OSIsoft.com. It's Pi World Online, and we're setting up. We actually had Pi World Online go live a week ago,
Hmm.
and now we're actually sorry, 2 weeks ago now. Time flies, and now they're actually doing, some of our customers are kind enough, and we love them for this, is they're doing, some Q&A sessions because there's been great interest. As everyone's doing a lot of video conferencing.
Yeah.
So that's all going to be, recorded, and it'll also be posted Pi World Online as well. Yeah,
Awesome. Good to know. Well, we'll make sure to include a link to that so that everyone can go and check it
for
out if
sure.
there's some added interest there. So thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks for having me here.